about John Brennan. I know John Brennan. I've met John Brennan several times. John Brennan is the man that killed Osama bin Laden at the order of President Barack Obama by integrating CIA assets, producing the intelligence, passing that intelligence on to our special mission war fighters, and executing that mission. He has unique intelligence knowledge which must be shared with his successors, and his opinion which should be brought forth whenever this nation needs to defend itself. Donald Trump does not concern himself with the protection of this nation. He concerns himself with the protection of Donald Trump. And so he allows people, as Steve said, people like Jared Kushner, who made contact with the Russians and asked for secure cryptographic communications to hide his back channel from the CIA and the NSA. He should not be cleared. John Brennan should be cleared. At this point, Donald Trump has given more top-secret information to the Russians just through inadvertent disclosure than the clearance that John Brennan has had. So this is an anathema.
Let's listen to what John Brennan told Nicole Wallace today about his service to both Democratic and Republican presidents and the way he thinks this is actually the way this feels for him today. Let's listen to this.
I served for 6 presidents, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, and I don't think there was ever a time that any intelligence or law enforcement or necessary professional questioned whether the President of the United States was taking their information seriously. So this is, I think, a sad time. We will come out from it, under it. I am very confident in the resilience of this and the strength of this nation. Mr. Trump is not going to bring this country down.
Steve Schmidt, John Brennan, sad but confident.
Well, look, Lawrence, I think that one of the things that we have to do as a country is to recognize how abnormal all of this is and to talk seriously with each other about a president who is purposely divisive, who pits Americans against each other, who incites the worst instincts and the worst impulses in the country, and to look around the world and to ask a question, is the country in decline? And when you look at the signs, it's hard to argue that we are not, and that there's a fundamental choice lying ahead for the American people in what I would argue is the most important midterm election in American history coming in November, and then the most important presidential election since the election of 1864, which was frankly a referendum on whether we would continue to be a country or not. The next presidential election will mark a choice for this country about whether it goes down a path of inexorable decline or begins an era of renewal following Donald Trump. He is right that it is a resilient country, and John Brennan is right to have faith in America, but our inheritance that was given to us by such sacrifice by generation of American patriots is not an entitlement. We are not guaranteed greatness in our future. And when you have a president as reckless, as incompetent, as mean-spirited as Donald Trump, when you see the brokenness in our politics, the pitting of American against American to the degree that we're seeing, it is not necessarily the case that everything is going to be okay. And I think there's a real lack of imagination in the country's mind about the damage that a president as incompetent, reckless, ignorant as this one could cause in the world. So I appreciate the director's optimism, but I'm someone who is deeply concerned, deeply worried about the trajectory that this vile president has the country on.
Let's listen to more of what John Brennan told Nicole Wallace, talking about the president's dishonesty, his lack of integrity, his nastiness, especially the nastiness we've seen.
I got a problem. Who's online? I have a problem.
I must tell you that Mr. Trump's dishonesty, his lack of integrity, his nastiness, mean-spiritedness, the types of things that he has just tweeted out over the past 72 hours, the terms that he uses, this is not what I think of American presidents, nor of America. We're better than this. We have to be better than this. We have been a shining example to the world, and Mr. Trump is letting this country down.
Malcolm Nance, John Brennan pleading that we are better than this.
And we are better than this. I mean, we are absolutely better than this. And what breaks my heart is that there are right now hundreds of intelligence watchstanders around the world watching this program, listening to these words, thinking that their careers, their dedication, working in the dark, their selflessness, which they ask for no public recognition, can just be tossed away because of a political whim. And if it can happen to the highest person at the CIA, even though he's a former director, it can happen to the average watchstander. And it might be happening. I mean, you know, this administration almost immediately deployed political commissars early on. Steve Schmidt is right.
What up, Bones?
This administration is incompetent, and their incompetence shows their meanness, their ruthlessness, and their utter villainy to a certain extent. But you know, I'm in Philadelphia, and every time I come here, where I was born, I'm just reminded back to the Declaration of Independence, which addressed this at one time, where I paraphrase, you know, a prince with the characteristics that's marked such as a tyrant is unfit to be the leader of a free people, and that's where we are.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.
And from here, transitions to the Muay Thai clinch. That knee might have landed there. Right on the button.
We want care to be more effective. We want care to be safer. Many times, as you're caring for one patient, in the back of your mind, you have this constant loop saying, what about my other patients who aren't in my line of sight?
Innovation and you, Phillips.
Day 573 of the Trump administration, and today saw that rare hybrid in the short history of this White House. A big shiny object, a giant political distraction, in this case designed to attract attention away from the damage being caused by Omarosa's book, but an action underlying the shiny object that has real and potentially chilling consequences. Today, President Trump revoked the security clearance of this man, former CIA Director John Brennan. Brennan, who we should point out these days is a senior national security and intelligence analyst for both NBC and NBC News and MSNBC, is also a consistent and strident critic of this president. He was also one of the first officials to sound the alarm on Russian meddling in our 2016 election. Here is the president tonight quoting one of his supporters who appeared on Fox News. John Brennan is a stain on the country. We deserve better than this. From the briefing room earlier today, here is how the White House press secretary laid out the reasons for stripping Brennan's clearance while threatening to take similar action against other Trump critics.
Any benefits that senior officials might glean from consultations with Mr. Brennan are now outweighed by the risks posed by his erratic conduct and behavior. Mr. Brennan has recently leveraged his status as a former high-ranking official with access to highly sensitive information to make a series of unfounded and outrageous allegations, wild outbursts on the internet and television about this administration. As part of this review, I am evaluating action with respect to the following individuals: James Clapper, James Comey, Michael Hayden, Sally Yates, Susan Rice, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and Bruce Orr.
Not only are they all Trump critics, some of those under evaluation are closely tied, as you know, to the Russia investigation. Our own Andrea Mitchell reports the president's own director of national intelligence, Dan Coats, was not aware in advance of today's announcement, nor were other senior intelligence officials. The White House was asked for evidence.
I'm tired, guys. What's going on, man? I'm not a big fan of Fortnite. Not as much as I am, Binky.
Have any reason to believe or evidence to suggest Brennan has misused classified information or monetized his access to it, as was alleged earlier by this administration?
Again, I've laid out the reasons for the decision that was made on this specific instance. We'll continue to review the other actions.
Is there a reason by the absence of you not saying those things you didn't find any evidence of that?
No, I wouldn't make any assumptions. I'm telling you what the decision was based off on in this case.
Today's statement pulling Brennan's security clearance was dated July 26th.
Yeah, he's a big bum.
That it was standing by on the skids, ready for weeks, and was pulled out and announced just today. John Brennan is famously one of the stone-cold faces in that photo taken in the White House Situation Room the night Osama bin Laden was killed. Finding bin Laden was a huge part of his job and his life's work after 9/11. Phil Rucker of the Washington Post put this out tonight. It shows Brennan's major postings in his decades of service to this country, much of it clandestine. CIA Station Chief, Saudi Arabia. CIA Station Chief, Director of Terrorist Threat Integration Center, Director of National Counterterrorism Center, White House Homeland Security Advisor, CIA Director, briefed 3 presidents. Earlier, Brennan himself spoke by phone with our colleague Nicole Wallace.
They're cheating me right now, Bones.
I do believe that
I got all the objectives, but I didn't get
action.
That's bullshit.
To try to intimidate and suppress any criticism of him.
I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
And revoking my security clearances is his way of trying to get back at me. And this is not going to deter me at all. I'm going to continue to speak out. I think he fears individuals who could damage him, could damage his standing among the American people. And look at the way he's been referring to Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller, who is a
what up, Huckleberry? I'm just
icon within the law enforcement.
Well, I was trying to get the one perk, but I'm gonna do a little single player real quick.
Interference in the election, and the denigration of Bob Mueller as well as his team of investigators is reprehensible. I think Mr. Trump is getting more and more concerned, more and more desperate. I would say more and more frightened as there is closer and closer magnification of some of the things that those around him have been involved in.
Just a short time ago tonight, 2 other intel chiefs whose clearances are under review also spoke out.
The White House just messaged the entire American intelligence community. If you stand up and say things that upset the president or with which he disagrees, he will punish you. And that is a horrible message to be sending to folks who are there to tell you objective truth.
The bigger issue here, Chris, to me, is what this implies, the implications of this for the First Amendment. And the other question I have is, where does this end?
Both of those 2 gentlemen have 50-plus years experience. Let's bring in our lead-off panel for another busy Wednesday night. The aforementioned Andrea Mitchell, NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent, host of Andrea Mitchell Reports, noon Eastern, weekdays on this network. Clint Watt's back with us as well, a former FBI Special Agent and member of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And Peter Baker, Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times. Welcome to you both, and good evening. Andrea, you get to define this. Is this a giant, shiny object, or an action with deep consequences, or both?
It's both. I mean, you are an astute observer. You recognize a bright, shiny object. The timing, clearly this was dated July 26th, released today. It's a distraction from Omarosa and all the rest of the reality TV show that has the White House has become. That said, there are real implications of this. First Amendment, as Jim Clapper suggested, and as Mike Hayden said, a real warning, a chilling effect, not just to the outside commentators, they're tough, they can make their own decisions what to do, but to the intelligence community, who are also tough, but they have to stand up to this president. Now they see what the repercussions. One of those on that list of possible future revocation of security clearances is, Bruce Orr, who is in the Justice Department right now and had a working relationship with an asset, Christopher Steele, on the dossier. That was enough to put him on the list. It's really remarkable. It's unprecedented. And the irony here, sadly, is that the whole reason that Mike Hayden helped establish the precedent that former CIA directors would keep their clearances is to help new administrations be able to quickly talk to their predecessors and find out if something is unusual, if it's alarming, something in Pakistan, something in Saudi Arabia. That is the whole point. that they are able to quickly, without having to go through a long clearance process, talk to someone like John Brennan and say, what about this guy we just picked up? What about his relatives? What do you know? What should we be alert to? What do you think is happening in Saudi?
And more on that very point a bit later on in this conversation. Hey, Peter Baker, there's reason to believe the president has again tonight pulled a Lester Holt, and here's what I mean by that. We have his famous comment, Lester looked at, as he put it, Trump and Russia, and yes, of course, he was going to fire Comey. Well, tonight in an interview with the Wall Street Journal, the president says he was going to do this last week, but it was too hectic, perhaps forgetting he was on vacation, and then there is this. I call it the rigged witch hunt. It's a sham, Mr. Trump said in an interview. So talking about what he did to Brennan, and these people led it, he added, so I think it's something that had to be done. So doesn't that, Peter, right there blow up any appearance of process or rigor that went into this that the press secretary tried to underscore today in the briefing room?
Yeah, that's right. Look, he makes very clear that the criteria for him is the people who are investigating him or started the investigation to him or somehow are linked to the investigation to him. In other words, the people that he considers to be, out to get him. This isn't obviously a concern about the use of classified information. They don't have any evidence.
Cheers. Cheers, EA.
Instead, this is a list. It's not just that. Look, if there is a concern about John Brennan and something he had done, they might have handled this in a different way. This is not about that. This is a list. Who is the list that they put out? That list is one after the other of people that President Trump has made clear he considered to be his enemies. He has gone after repeatedly on Twitter, in public settings, in all sorts of ways. And this is a list of people he wants punished because, as he told Peter Nicholas and Michael Bender from the Wall Street Journal, they were connected to the Russia investigation.
Clint Watts, we have, by my count, around 50 minutes remaining in today, East Coast time. So knowing we still have 50 minutes, I'll say this, I'll take some risk. If you enjoyed today in America, that is to say, a day free of terrorist attack on this country, it stands to reason you would want all of these ex-officials who've devoted their lives and careers to the intel business to all have their security clearances so they can all be of counsel to the people taking on that enormous burden now, correct?
That is correct. It's called eligible for access. I doubt the president actually understands the distinction. There are people who are eligible for access with a security clearance, and then you're read on to different topics.
Yeah, you're not at home following all the intel, but it's so you can be read in.
That's right. And then once you are read in, you have access to the actual intelligence. That's what they do with formers. They put them eligible for access. This allows them to come back in. Let's say you're negotiating an Iran deal where you have sanctions coming up and maybe nuclear options that you're trying to restrict. You would want to bring back people that have been talking to these characters that State Department, NSA, whoever it might be, are talking to so that they can interface and get some understanding. Even more, a lot of the former intel officials, law enforcement officials, some of them have gone now into the private sector. You hear them talk about, they're trying to profit from their clearance. No, actually, that's key for public-private partnerships. It's one of the most critical dimensions right now in cybersecurity because there are only a few people in the private sector that can actually interface with the government on cybersecurity. So they've been invaluable over the past few years. These linkages are critical for the good of our national security. The only good that was done was for the Trump team today so that they could take a political shot at their adversaries.
I'm thinking of the former FBI official we have on the air who's the head of CrowdStrike now. So he takes his government experience, he's in the web business privately, but if they need him back, they know he's reputable and served his country if they need to read him in on a problem.
Not only can they read him in on it, he understands all the participants. Yes, Sean Henry. And he understands all the participants, all the procedures, and he knows how the U.S. government works. This is the key distinction. You can't just pull someone off the street and say, tell me about this. They don't even have any context for it. So it's not good for our national security, and it's definitely not good for America.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click on this list to see lots of other great videos.
Yeah, he's digging into that leg kick. Head kick! Throwing hard in the pocket.
It's a great giving Mike Kratz.
seconds to go here in round one. It connects there, Joe. This could be it right here.
The day of reckoning for Paul Manafort. We can report right now that the jury is getting the official instructions from this judge, which means they are literally moments away from getting the case and deliberating on Paul Manafort's fate. A conviction on all the charges could give Trump's former campaign manager an effective life sentence. He's yet to face a trial on separate charges in Washington, nor what could come down the pike as well, with or without a pardon, which is potential state charges for related allegations like tax evasion. But what's happening now is important, and we've seen it from inside the courtroom. This is Bob Mueller's first criminal trial in this Russia probe, and the scene today was a courtroom overflowing at maximum capacity. Manafort entered the court with a small smile, we're told. His wife was sitting directly behind him in the first row. And while I will be clear, we know nothing at this moment about what this jury is thinking after all this, we do know what they're thinking about 11 days of testimony, financial records, and evidence suggesting Manafort committed crimes for years. And here is exactly how Mueller's team closed out their argument. For jurors who might think that Manafort got kind of a rough deal by stepping into the spotlight of politics, and that's how he caught so much heat, they argued, you see it here on the screen, no person is above the law. And for anyone lost in the blizzard of accounting over these last several days, they argue that the financial crimes do boil down to a case about lies. A little bit more so you can judge it yourself. They say Mr. Manafort lied when he had money, and he lied to get more money when he didn't. They also reminded this jury about Manafort hiding his income as a loan, and quote, proof that magically becomes income. The prosecution then turning to Manafort's star witness, the person who worked with him so much and hurt him potentially so much, Rick Gates, caught with his hand in the cookie jar. And they told these jurors, except it wasn't a cookie jar. It was a huge dumpster of foreign money. Manafort did not take this stand, and his lawyers called 0 witnesses during the trial. Now, many experts have noted that does suggest a kind of weakness to their case, even though legally there's nothing negative to be inferred from a defendant declining to testify. The jurors heard Manafort's lawyers, though, try out a broader argument. And it's an argument that's interesting because it touches on something we all struggle with in life. What does it mean to know something? What does it mean to be certain? Well, these jurors were told by Manafort's lawyers, who didn't put on much evidence, hey, it's not enough to think someone is probably guilty or likely guilty. And as for all those debts and bills that may have looked even more than likely, well, they made a different argument and said, okay, even if that's a problem, I'm sure many of us have had some trouble paying bills. So here we are tonight at an inflection point. On a night when Donald Trump wants people to be looking at other things and talking about other things, these jurors are going to be talking about one thing. Was Paul Manafort involved in criminal conspiracies while he was running the Trump campaign? This verdict could come as early as tomorrow morning. What happens next? What happens for Manafort and Mueller in the Russia probe? A lot of that could basically depend on what these people, these Americans who've heard all this evidence, what they decide in the coming days. I'm joined now by Ellie Honig, who's a former federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, quite a busy place in these stories. Tim O'Brien, an executive editor of Bloomberg View, the author of Trump Nation and a former defendant in a Trump lawsuit. And Kim Whalen, who's also, of course, a former prosecutor. Ellie, when you look at what happens now, based on your trial experience, what do you think is in the minds of these jurors, and how strong was the Mueller closing argument?
I think it was exactly as strong as it needed to be.
Appreciate that, UFC.
Where the prosecution needed to go in there and dazzle the jury, and sometimes there are trials where you need a little bit of dazzle. The evidence was so strong, all that the prosecution needed to do was be solid and clear and credible and workmanlike, and I think they did that. And the line that really jumped out at me when I read it, I said, that's smart, is when the prosecution said the star witness in this case is the documents. And it's not, it doesn't rhyme, it's not catchy, but it's such an effective, sorry, if it doesn't rhyme, I'm not interested. Some jurors may feel that way, but you know, it's boring but effective, and it gets the attention off of Rick Gates, and it gets the attention on those black and white documents that the defense cannot run from.
Well, it does go to the blizzard, though, Kim, in that we see that the Mueller team here both went in deep on all of the financial chicanery, but then pulled back in closing arguments, as we see lawyers do. And I want to read more from one of Mueller's lieutenants here, Greg Andres, who says, quote, "The defense, Manafort's asking you to ignore your common sense. Manafort told so many lies about his income, he can't keep them straight. And this one is interesting, do you really think we need more witnesses?" What were they doing there?
Well, I do have something catchy for you, which is documents don't lie, they don't die, and they don't misremember. And here we've got jurors who have filled out tax returns, and they have applied for loans, or at least filled out forms, financial forms for credit cards, etc. And so they know that what they've done, which is say the truth, tell the truth. And we also have 10 witnesses, IRS agent, FBI agent, former accountants, in addition to 3 dozen emails confirming knowledge. So I think there is a tremendous amount of evidence in favor of the government here, and to the extent to which, if we have a hung jury, which I think is unlikely, it would be for some reason other than a doubt for which there can be a reason, which is the standard that the government has to satisfy beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well, Tim, since we're all quoting, and that was about lies, there is a saying in hip-hop that also exists beyond hip-hop, that men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. And yet, Paul Manafort, if he has anything in common with Donald Trump, it's in an area that you've reported extensively on, which earned you that lawsuit, which is lying about money.
Lying about income, lying about, paperwork around deals. Getting back to what Ellie said, I do think there is a very damning stream of evidence here presented to this jury. It would seem to me as an outsider looking in that there is zero chance of acquittal here, but there can be a road. There's always more. There could be,
fuck out of here, man.
It could go either way. I think where it is now, it sort of begs the question, one, that if he does get convicted, why did Manafort's attorneys go to the line on this one? And why didn't he plead out earlier? And I think, again, raw speculation is he's probably anticipating getting a pardon at some point. But if this goes against him, they're really going to have to rethink that whole strategy. I think the other thing to bear in mind here is there's still another trial. He has to go through another trial in Washington in September. If this one goes off the rails, do they delay that one?
I'm going to
out, or do they deal with this one at a later date? There's a lot of balls in the air right now.
Well, Nelly, on the pardon, Washington Post notes Trump seems to genuinely believe, or at least claim, that the investigation is unfair. Pardoning Manafort would be a great way for him to both assert control and stick it to Mueller. And this is something that other presidents, including in the Iran-Contra matter, you saw pardons, and people felt that it was obviously looked guilty, but at that time it was lawful.
I think, Ari, if we have a conviction here, I think we're going to enter a really interesting sort of stare down between the president and Paul Manafort. Manafort is not going to just take a conviction and go die in jail.
Kick his legs a million times.
And so I think he's hoping for a pardon, and I think the president is hoping to prevent him from cooperating, but he needs cover if he's going to give a pardon. And those tweets that we've seen the last couple of weeks where the president's saying...
All right, guys, I understand you guys want to watch the stream, but
set a little bit of a pretext to cover the president if he does decide to go...
Hey, you guys do me a favor, log on in the morning time. If you guys are new, hit the like button and hit the sub button. I really got to go to sleep, man. I got to go to work tomorrow, but I'm going to be streaming tomorrow before work. So make sure you guys hit the like button, hit the sub button, and have a good night, guys. One love, baby.